For over 40 years, the upper floor of Graceland has been locked away from the world. No tours, no cameras, no exceptions. Riley Keough, Elvis Presley's granddaughter, is finally breaking that silence. And what she reveals changes everything we thought we knew about the king of rock and roll. Before it became a legend, Graceland was just a quiet 10-room colonial revival home, built in 1939 by Memphis printing company owner S.E. Toof, sitting on open countryside with clean white columns and a dignified front porch. That changed in 1957 when a 22-year-old Elvis Presley, already consumed by early superstardom, paid $102,500 for the property, and what drew him wasn't the size or the grandeur, it was the promise of privacy. The privacy didn't last. Almost immediately, Elvis began reshaping Graceland into something far more personal, turning a modest southern home into a physical extension of who he was: loud, colorful, unpredictable, and deeply human. One of the most striking additions came in the late 1960s, when he built the Jungle Room, a space-carpeted floor-to-ceiling in green shag, packed with carved wooden furniture and exotic decor that looked nothing like any other room in any other house in Memphis. That room doubled as a recording studio, and it's where Elvis laid down some of his final tracks, including Moody Blue. Behind the house, he designed the meditation garden in 1964, a peaceful stone-lined sanctuary that would later become his final resting place alongside his parents, his grandmother, and eventually his daughter, Lisa Marie. Fans still arrive in silence and leave flowers, handwritten notes, and personal tokens at the grave. Since opening to the public in 1982, Graceland has drawn over 20 million visitors, making it the second most visited private home in the United States, behind only the White House. And yet, for all those tours and all those open doors, one part of the estate has never been seen by anyone outside the family: the upper floor. Locked, preserved, untouched since August 16, 1977. What's worth sitting with for a moment is just how deliberate that preservation has been. This wasn't a case of a family forgetting to renovate or running out of time to sort through old belongings. Every year that passed, every new exhibit added downstairs, every tour group that walked through the front door, all of it happened while that staircase remained off limits. Someone kept making that choice year after year, decade after decade. And that kind of sustained, quiet commitment to keeping something sealed tells you more about what's up there than any tour ever could. Only a tiny circle of family members and trusted staff were ever allowed past that staircase. And the reason wasn't scandal or cover-up, it was something far more personal than that. Riley Keough, now the official owner of Graceland, grew up visiting those rooms as a child, quietly absorbing a world that time had stopped touching, never allowed. First, to disturb a single object. Now, for the first time, she's describing what exists behind those locked doors. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, gave the order to seal the upper floor immediately after his son's death, not as a publicity decision, not as a museum strategy, but as a private act of grief that held for nearly 5 decades. Elvis's bedroom remains exactly as he left it, with silk sheets still dressing the bed and a Bible on one nightstand covered in his own handwritten annotations, while the other nightstand holds prescription bottles, some of them still full. Tucked beneath the bed, Riley found a shoebox marked "Do Not Open," and inside were unsent letters, one addressed to Lisa Marie, and another that simply read, "To whoever finds this after I'm gone." Those letters, she admits, are too personal to share publicly, but she acknowledges they exist, and finding them shifted how she understands her grandfather entirely. Down the hallway, Elvis's private study sits lined with books on numerology, Christian theology, and Eastern mysticism. And inside those shelves, Riley found notebooks filled with his own handwriting reflections on fame, on loneliness, on spirituality. Some entries reading like journaled prayers and others fragmenting into unfinished lyrics and scribbled quotations. One page, she recalls, carried a single word written over and over: "Free? Think about what that means for a second." This was a man who had everything the world said you were supposed. First, to want the fame, the money, the house, the music, the adoration of millions, and he was sitting alone in a room upstairs, writing the same word over and over, like a question he couldn't stop asking himself. That one page says more about who Elvis really was than any concert footage or gold record ever could. And the fact that it was hidden up there, unseen for decades, makes it feel even more honest. And then there's the room no official Graceland literature has ever mentioned. Riley calls it the quiet room, a small tucked-away space at the end of the upstairs hallway that Elvis designed himself as a private meditation area with low lighting, cushions on the floor, and the soft, continuous hum of a sound machine. No photographs of it exist anywhere, no fan account has ever described it, and until Riley spoke about it, the world didn't even know it was there. As for the bathroom, where Elvis passed away, she won't describe it in detail out of respect, confirming only that nothing inside has ever been altered, not even the towels replaced sealed with the same reverence as a burial chamber. Riley says the upstairs stayed silent for so long because her mother Lisa Marie found it too painful, too sacred, too unresolved to discuss. After Lisa Marie's death in 2023, Riley stepped into a new role as both owner and voice of a family legacy, and she felt the time had arrived to share what had never been told, not for spectacle, not for profit, but for understanding. The upper first floor will stay closed to visitors, but as she put it, some spaces are meant to stay personal, but that doesn't mean they have to stay secret. Thousands of devoted believers hold that Elvis Presley faked his own death and escaped through a secret tunnel buried beneath Graceland, and what keeps this theory breathing isn't blind devotion. It's the specific, unusual details surrounding his final years and the physical layout of the estate itself. The tunnel rumor has circulated for decades, with former employees and unverified visitor accounts describing a hidden underground passage running from the main house to the rear of the property, supposedly stretching beneath the meditation garden and emerging through a wooded exit behind the estate. Supporters point to Elvis's dramatic withdrawal in the mid-1970s when he had rooms swept for listening devices, stopped touring entirely, and rarely came down from the second floor at all, behavior that believers read not as reclusion but as preparation. Official Graceland blueprints make no mention of any tunnel, but those documents are incomplete by design, since the second floor doesn't appear in them either, and that floor clearly exists. A freelance journalist in 1987 claimed to have found a partially concealed concrete entryway near the rear carport, but no photographs ever surfaced, and the story was never verified, and yet once it spread, it never fully went away. What followed was a string of sightings that stretched across 2 decades. A man resembling Elvis reportedly boarded a plane at Memphis International Airport in 1978 under the name John Burroughs, which happened to be the same alias Presley had used repeatedly when checking into hotels on tour. In 1984, a tourist photographed a groundskeeper behind the estate who fans insisted was Elvis himself, older, heavier, wearing sunglasses, and Graceland staff never identified who the man actually was. Sightings continued into the 1990s, including a 1994 report of a man matching Elvis's description, walking into a California DMV, paying in cash, and when asked for his name, quietly saying, "That's not important." Here's what makes the John Burroughs details so hard to dismiss for believers. That wasn't some random alias pulled from thin air. John Burroughs was a name Elvis had used for years, a name his inner circle knew, a name connected to real hotel check-ins and real paper trails from his touring days. For someone who wanted to vanish quietly, using a known alias would seem like a careless mistake unless the whole point was to leave just enough of a trace for the right people to recognize it. Some believers point to the death certificate itself, where his middle name appears as Aaron rather than the legal spelling Aaron. And to them, that wasn't a clerical error, it was a deliberate signal. No verified forensic evidence places Elvis alive after 1977, no confirmed DNA match exists, and most supposed witnesses have walked back their accounts over time. But the theory endures because so much of his final chapter stayed hidden, because he hadn't been photographed publicly for months before his death, and because the place where he spent nearly all of his time remains sealed to this day. Riley Keough doesn't try to disprove every rumor, understanding that the mystery is part of what keeps her grandfather alive in the public imagination. And her role as she sees it is not to explain him, but to protect what mattered to him. Maybe there was never a tunnel. Maybe the name on the gravestone was just a well-intentioned correction. Or maybe, for a man who spent his entire life on display, keeping one part of himself permanently hidden was the most defiant thing he ever did. When Elvis died in 1977, Graceland passed to his only child, Lisa Marie Presley, and when Lisa Marie died in 2023, ownership transferred to her daughter Riley Keough. But that transition came with immediate conflict, as Priscilla Presley contested a 2016 amendment to the estate's trust before the matter was eventually settled out of court. What the dispute made clear is that the Presley legacy isn't just emotional territory, it's legally contested ground worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And that value has attracted other claimants for decades. At least a dozen individuals have come forward over the years, claiming to be Elvis's biological children, some in tabloids and some in actual courtrooms, with one man seeking a court order to exhume Elvis's body for DNA testing, a request that was denied, and another submitting a hair sample taken from an auction lock of Elvis's hair as supposed evidence of paternity, which the estate dismissed as unreliable. The Elvis Presley Trust governs the estate's finances, property, and intellectual property rights, and for any alleged heir to gain legal recognition, verified DNA with a clear and controlled chain of custody would be required, a threshold most claims have never come close to meeting. Riley has never publicly addressed any of these alleged relatives, and neither did Lisa Marie before her, a silence that has only deepened the speculation over time. What's striking about Riley's position is just how unusual it actually is. She isn't a corporate executive who inherited a brand. She's a 34-year-old woman who grew up in the shadow of one of the most scrutinized legacies in American history, who lost her mother in 2023 and her grandfather long before she was old enough to know him directly, and who now carries legal and cultural responsibility for an estate that millions of people feel personally connected to. That's not a job description anyone trains for, and the choices she makes, what to share, what to protect, what to digitize, and what to leave sealed, will shape how Elvis is remembered long after this generation is gone. What's clear is that Riley now controls one of the most valuable and culturally significant estates in American history, and she isn't a passive steward. She works directly with archivists and preservation specialists, approves new exhibits, and oversees the digital preservation of Elvis's handwritten lyrics, set lists, letters, and photographs through high-resolution scanning combined with AI-assisted metadata tagging, all designed for future exhibitions and academic research. Requests to open the second floor to tourists have been refused, requests to film inside private family spaces have been declined, and any interest in reality television or fictional dramatizations of Elvis's life has been met with zero enthusiasm. She isn't selling his story, she's structuring it. And if a legitimate heir with a verifiable biological connection to the Presley bloodline ever surfaces, Riley will be the one to decide what happens next. Not a judge, not a journalist, not a viral post. The next chapter goes through her. Elvis's final known studio sessions took place in the Jungle Room in February and October of 1976, producing raw and emotionally charged recordings that included Way Down, Moody Blue, and reimagined gospel favorites, but according to audio engineers and session musicians who were present, not everything recorded in those sessions made it to release, with several songs left incomplete or shelved entirely as his health declined. RCA and Sony have put out curated box sets of alternate takes and rare material over the years, and that word, curated, carries weight, because there's a real difference between, first, what's been cleared for commercial release, and what may still sit untouched in Graceland's private storage. Bootleggers have complicated the story for decades, with underground cassettes and vinyl releases surfacing regularly claiming to contain lost Elvis tracks, some genuine outtakes, others almost certainly fabrications. One infamous bootleg from the 1990s featured a haunting ballad called This Is Goodbye, supposedly captured just weeks before his death. But it was later debunked when the voice was matched to a known impersonator, and new tapes have kept emerging regardless. Archivists working with the estate have acknowledged that portions of Elvis's bedroom and study haven't been fully cataloged yet, with documents, books, tapes, and unreleased materials among the uncatalogued items, and one former estate employee anonymously claimed that a reel-to-reel tape player turned up in the upstairs study alongside a stack of unlabeled tapes. There's no official confirmation of that claim, but it aligns with something Elvis's former producer Felton Jarvis once described: late-night tapes and informal piano sessions deliberately kept off RCA's radar because Elvis wasn't ready for anyone to hear them, recordings that were personal, private, and never intended for release. Jarvis knew Elvis's recording habits better than almost anyone, and the picture he painted wasn't of a man who only sang when the label called. It was of someone who recorded constantly, privately, compulsively, the way some people journal or pray. The idea that none of those private sessions survived, that every tape was either destroyed or already released, is genuinely hard to believe when you consider how much of everything else upstairs has been left completely untouched. Whether those tapes survived, and whether they're still sitting in a cabinet somewhere inside that sealed upper room, is a question nobody has been able to answer. The vault, like the staircase above it, remains closed, but the music, if it exists, is still waiting somewhere inside. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and click the next video for more.